All right, we are recording. Welcome everyone to the, oh gosh, I always forget to look at what number the episode, 23rd, 24th episode of Dear Dr.
Okay, so I did creep your channel and it did say 22nd on the most recent one.
Okay,
So
okay, good.
my
23rd episode, thank you, of Dear Dr. Fantasy. And it is my delight to have as my guest here, Taylor from Maed Between the Pages. And thank you so much, Taylor, for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I've been looking
Honored to
forward to
be here.
this very much. And we were just discussing the nice little fall leaves that you have there. And I'm looking outside my window at the almost identical colors on the trees outside. And just a very pleasant morning here. And for you, of course, night.
Yeah.
But whatever time it is, wherever we are, it's just wonderful to get together with our people from our community here. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I can't wait to get started. Thanks
Yay.
for having me. I
Um,
appreciate it.
oh, it's my pleasure. It really is. I've really enjoyed, I got to know you first really through Steve's channel. We guys do the page chewing thing, you and PL and Steve. And I think you guys are doing a wonderful thing there. I really admire what you're doing. So I thought, I think it would be great to have the page chewing crew on Dear Dr. Fantasy for sure.
Uh,
So I'm excited to have you here and to discuss fantasy and books and whatever might come up. So
hmm. Yeah, I think Steve has really does that for many people, introduces them to other people in the community. Wherever he goes, people sing his praise, and it's the right thing to do. Um, so yeah, I really appreciate the other people in the community he's introduced me to. But page chewing has just been such a joy for the three of us. Steve and PL actually started it first, and then there was one.
how did you get involved in it? Do you mind telling
Yeah,
me the story?
yeah. So we did, or yeah, I wasn't part of the hosts at the time, but there was an interview with Zama Akhtar, the author of Gunmetal Gods.
Yes.
And it was the three of us as well as Lana from Lauren Lullabies. And
Okay.
it just, I don't know how to describe it, but the way that the three of us worked together and like ping ponged off of each other in the conversation without having to think about it. After the conversation, we were like, wow, that was, exhilarating in the way that good conversation can be.
Yeah.
And then they messaged me after and they're like, so what would you think about if you joined the hosts? So they brought me on board after that interview. And I'm so thankful that I'm part of the team now.
Well, that is so cool. Yeah. So you obviously made an impression during that conversation. Yeah.
I did my best, I suppose.
Yeah.
I
But
think all of us. Oh, go ahead.
no, no,
Sorry.
no. You go ahead. I'll after you.
I just think all of us like conversation, and that came through. If you have people that you can talk to easily, why fight that? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say too. Sometimes you just have those conversations with people, even for the first time, and there's a kind of flow to it. There's a nice exchange, and it
Hmm.
just works out beautifully. Yeah.
Yeah.
So nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Page chewing's really taken on a life of its own too at this point. So we're very excited to see where it's going to go. It's still quite open-ended. We don't exactly have, this is exactly where it's going to go, but we're
Yeah.
very excited for the future because we've just had some amazing guests, and I think it's only going to get, bigger as we go
Yeah.
along.
Oh, I love what you guys do, and you've done a lot, in my opinion, for the indie and self-published authors out there, which is so, so important. One of the most important things I feel that we can do on this platform is to shine a light on the books that are at a disadvantage in terms of marketing and getting the word out. And there's some great, great, great stories, as you know. I don't have to tell you out there that are fall under these labels of self-published and indie press and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it probably doesn't seem like it at this point because of the style of interviews we usually do. But I was actually very late to the indie and self-pub game, and it was actually who I mentioned before, Lana from her channel is Lauren Lullabies.
Yeah.
She runs the Indie Accords, right? So 2 years ago when she ran it for the first time, I was like, hey, this seems interesting. And then I read so many good books during that month that I was like, what is this new world?
Uh,
You know, cue the Aladdin music, a whole new world. So I just it took off after that. And now probably half my TBR is self-pub or indie.
wow, that's awesome. Yeah. So I have a sort of commitment. It's not written in stone, but to reading one indie or self-published book a month and featuring it
Mhm.
as a review and sometimes even discussing the book with the author. That's something I've tried to do as part of my channel, but I definitely can't claim 50%. That's fantastic. So
Yeah, well, TBR, that's my hope, not what I
yeah.
actually read, but
Yes, well, my
great.
TBRs are all highly aspirational, so I don't often actually accomplish them, but it's good to have something to shoot for so that you actually get something done, right?
Definitely agree. Definitely agree. It's I don't know why I do it to myself every month, but somehow beginning of the month, Taylor thinks 12 books are going to happen. Every month somehow.
It's the optimist in you, right?
Right? Well, that's one way to look at it. I'll take it.
I do a seasonal TBR, so I
Mm,
can hide the fact a little bit better that I haven't read all the books I said I was, well, wanting to read.
right.
So I think it's a little easier when you do it on a seasonal basis because
Mm,
people forget, oh, what did he say in the summer TBR? Oh, you can get to half of those. Okay. So anyway, I do think it's a fun thing to do, though, to try to organize yourself and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do this month or this season, and this is what this is what I'd love to accomplish, or these are what I'm interested in doing. So it's kind of a fun exercise anyway, the TBR, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, I enjoy making it. I complain about it consistently, but then I do it consistently. So I do very much enjoy making them because I guess I'm a planner at heart. So if I have, okay, I should read this or should read this, or if I find myself between books and not really sure where to go, it's nice to have a list to refer to. And also, I find it helps me make sure I'm hitting things that I want to hit that month. Like you said, maybe if I have an indie book I want to read every month, or if I take the time to research those types of things, then I always have one ready, if I'm trying to read a specific type of thing. Um, in theory, I was supposed to have a classics challenge this year and read one every month, but we don't speak about that on my channel because that disappeared. I did it until February, and I'm very proud of myself. But it's basically a running joke on my channel now. I've been reading Moby Dick for like 6 months. So
Well, if there's a book that would take 6 months or more to read, I guess that would be a good candidate, right?
yeah, I'm enjoying it more than I thought I would. There's even a fart joke in there that I wasn't expecting, but
That
you know,
wild and crazy Melville, right? Yeah.
yeah, it's got more humor than I thought. But I'm hitting the whale part, so like the more informational aspect of the book. So we'll see how that
Informational.
goes.
Yeah. Yeah. Very helpful exposition.
Yeah,
If you
totally.
wanted to go whale hunting.
Exactly. Very, very necessary for my life.
So, well, all right. Well, good luck with that. Um,
Thank you.
I didn't even know actually what TBR meant before. In fact, probably well into the starting of my channel, I actually didn't know what a tag was or what all these DNF and TBR and all these abbreviations and stuff.
We got our own lingo.
I guess this is a culture, right? This is a culture.
Yeah.
YouTube is very much a culture and is I think a changing one all the time in many ways and it's a community that's I've had a lot of fun getting to know and so
Yeah.
how long have you been a part of this? How long have you been doing the BookTube thing?
Well, I was part of the Panini generation. So when the pandemic hit, I
Okay.
made a channel because I suddenly found myself with time and a camera. And I've always read. I am one of those readers who has always read. Of course, I went through times in my life where I read more or less, or there were ups and downs, but I never thought there was a space to talk about it. And then I was a lurker on BookTube for a couple years. I don't remember exactly when I discovered it, but maybe like 2019, 2018-ish. I saw like a larger booktuber. I was like, this exists, the beautiful shelves in the background talking about books. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
lurked for a while. Yeah. And then I found that I had time on my hands suddenly. I was like, well, I like talking. I like books. Why don't I try it? The first video is questionable in quality.
Everybody's the infamous first video, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just have to do it, I've talked to a couple people who want to start a channel and they're like, I'm afraid my first video is not going to be good. I'm like, it's not going to be. You just have to accept that it's not going to be good, but no one will judge you for it because none of ours are good. So
Yeah. Yeah, so you actually knew what it was before you started a channel, I guess, because I just blundered into it without knowing a
really,
thing. I was just like, I think I should start a YouTube channel about fantasy books. I bet nobody's done that before. And I just did it, and then I realized, oh wait, there's all these people here doing this. So yeah,
great
I was,
minds think alike.
yeah, I suppose that was an interesting start, but yeah, I've learned a lot. There's a whole culture to learn here, and get to know people, and it's fantastic in that sense. But so
Yeah.
you were 2020 then?
I think.
Okay.
See, every time people ask me, I don't remember if it was like 2019 or 2020. Pretty sure it was 2020 during the pandemic.
I bet it was, so if it was during the pandemic, it had to be 2020. Yeah, I
Pretty
think.
sure it was 2020.
Yeah.
Um,
Or I'm going with 2020 because I was 2020 as well. So we're class of
okay, well, we'll
2020.
just be part of that group.
Class of 2020 is the
There we go.
right.
There
Uh,
we go.
so yeah, I actually started in February 2020 myself, which was the pandemic was going on, but we didn't know it yet. I think it wasn't until March really that we sort of knew.
Mm,
So I started technically before, I guess, the pandemic, but just before. So one of
mm.
and it turned out to be probably a good timing on my part to start a YouTube channel, I suppose.
Yeah.
One of the few times in my life when I've had good timing. But
Yeah.
yeah, yep. So, and it has been, I think, important for a lot of people during that time and has remained. So, uh,
Yeah, I think the pandemic gave so many people a chance to slow down.
yeah,
Like of course, I'm sure you've been a reader for most of your life, also considering your job. But um, when you're younger, it's not cool to read, or, you go through phases in your life with the way that people view your hobby, if it's reading. And I still had never in my life until the pandemic had so many people reach out to me and say, hey, you read, right? So, like, do you have some recommendations for me? It was such a wonderful but weird experience because I was like, since when are you interested? Like, I'm happy, but like,
yeah,
I was shocked by how many people reached out. So I guess reading is cool again. So
yeah.
that's
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly oblivious, so I just always thought it was cool, I guess. But, um,
yeah.
but yeah, no, reading has always been important to me. And the thing for me though was I didn't know a lot of people who read fantasy. I had lots of lovely people in my life, but not many of them are interested in fantasy. So the first thing I did was I started a fantasy novels class at my college, which it's was a great experience, but changes in curricula and things like that made it harder and harder for the course to run. So I thought,
Mm.
what can I do to probably try to save this course and maybe just reach a broader community of people who love fantasy, and that was why I started a channel. So
Oh, I
yeah,
see. I see. Well, that's really cool though that you started that at your school. Clearly that, I mean, your passion for fantasy shows in all of your videos, but it
yeah,
was clearly there pre you recording it if you were,
yeah,
spearheading that kind of thing at your institution.
yeah. Actually, I would say that the fantasy novels course was good preparation for me to start a channel.
Mhm.
So that worked out well too. Another thing I blundered into. So
Look at that. It's all coming together.
yeah, yeah. Life has a way of doing that, I think, sometimes, right? It feels like it anyway, right?
Does. It does, I think. Yeah. Yeah, I think and something that I really enjoy about this community as well is we both read fantasy, but the type of content that we create is so different. So you
Yes.
can always get like very different perspectives or different views on things from different creators. And that's something I found so much joy in this space, because I can watch a video of yours and see you break down, the way that something can be interpreted, and then I can watch someone else and watch just a plain review, or I can watch AP and have him break down the storytelling. So there's just so many different types of videos that I don't know, I get so much joy from it.
I completely agree. And that's one of the reasons I do this. Dear Dr. Fantasy is my way of trying to um, expose myself too. It's sort of a selfish motive, I guess, but to the diverse group of people that we have here in this community. And
Yeah.
you made a video recently about diversity in reading, and I thought it was fantastic, by the way. It was a really great
Thank
video.
you. Thank
I
you.
wanted to ask also how your little spider friend is doing.
Gerald. Gerald,
Gerald, how's
his
Gerald?
name is Gerald. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's doing his thing. Um, I saw him jumping around earlier today near the pothos. So
Okay.
we're existing, coexisting.
Good. Yes. So yeah, diversity inclusive of spiders even. So
Yeah,
good.
I'm working on it. There's always things to work on within yourself. So
I hear you. I definitely hear you. So I'm always trying to work on this person here.
yeah.
And so this is part of that. And I love that we have so many, as you were saying, voices in this community and people to learn from, because that's what I'm all about too, is I love learning from other people and their experiences, which are always different from mine, but some are more different than others, depending
Mhm.
on their backgrounds and where they're from and other factors. So this is a wonderful thing that we have this opportunity to learn from each other. And I think you made that point very eloquently in your video about
Oh, thank
diversity.
you.
So
Thank
yeah,
you.
I appreciate that very much.
That means a lot to hear from you. I think, I'm also a teacher. So I think to
Yes.
be a good teacher, you have to be a good student. You have to be able to do both sides, and you have to
Yeah.
like being a student to be a good teacher. So I'm with you as well. I just like learning. And I think that was why I approached the video the way that I did, as a student of the world kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uh, because I think that innate curiosity is so important to grow as a person and to see other perspectives. I think that innate curiosity should be fostered, but we tend to squash it, I think, the older we get.
It can
So,
happen. It can happen. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. For sure. And it's important, I think, that just that message be out there. And I thought you put it in a very nice way too. So
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, online discourse can be vitriolic to
yes,
put it
I have
bluntly.
noticed that at times. Yes.
To put it bluntly.
Yeah.
And there's, a space for all different types of language to be used, but that's just the way that I choose to approach those types of topics
I
with
like
less.
to, so the way you came at it was very positive, I thought. And you said, what can we gain from diversity?
Yeah.
That was great. I think that's really the way to go at it.
Mm.
And you made some excellent points, provided some great insights in the process, I thought. Um, but speaking of diversity and reading and all that, I would love to know about your reading journey. My standard question I ask all my guests on Dear Dr. Fantasy is about your reading life and what are some of the most important books and stories that have informed you over the years, starting from when you were just a little person up to the present. And so going on the premise that you are what you read, Taylor, what are some of the books that you would highlight in your reading journey?
Yeah, I mean, if we start from when I was young, as I mentioned, I've always been reading. Two stick out to me from my little childhood. One would be The Magic Tree House.
Ah, okay.
So I would go to the library and just read those in one sitting and wouldn't even have to check them out because I loved them so much. Sometimes I would anyway because I wanted to reread them. But I loved those books. So that was, I guess, maybe the beginning of the fantasy love.
Mm,
Uh, I also one that sticks out from my childhood is a book called The Lupine Lady. No, that's what my family called it. It's called Miss Rumphius, and we
Oh, Miss
the Lupine
Rumphius.
Lady.
Huh.
I don't know. Have you heard of that one?
No, I love the title though. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I guess more of an obscure children's book,
Huh.
but it's about this woman named Miss Rumphius who everywhere she goes, she scatters lupine seeds. And so she kind of travels the world and ends up scattering lupine seeds throughout her travels. And then those flowers, grow up there. And it's her telling the story of her life in like a seaside cottage to a bunch of children, telling them about her adventures. Uh,
Wow. Huh. And
yeah,
you're a very well-traveled person yourself. So do you think that had some influence on you there?
maybe it
Huh.
was Miss Rumphius all along.
Have you been scattering seeds as you've been going all over the world?
Maybe I have been.
Hmm.
My my takeaway from that when I was a kid is just that you can always leave a place better than when you found it. So,
Ah,
you know, that really impacted me. I love that book.
beautiful.
So,
Beautiful.
yeah. So I'd say those two as a kid. And then growing up, I was part of the Harry Potter generation,
Of
so
course. Yeah.
um before I could read, my dad read them to me, and
Yeah.
it became a pattern that every time a new one came out, we'd read it together, even when I was definitely old enough to read them on my own. So that definitely has a special place in my heart for sure.
Same
Uh,
here, except I was the dad. And
oh, I love that.
I read them to my daughters, with my daughters, both of which were big time Harry Potter fans. My older daughter's probably close to your age, and the younger ones, about a decade younger, but both went through their big Harry Potter phases. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I was in the same boat.
Yeah,
I
I
remember.
mean, I don't know anyone of your generation on this
Yeah,
platform who didn't, so far anyway. Somebody will come, I'm sure, in the comments say, I didn't read Harry Potter, but
yeah.
I'm so far I haven't met anyone who wasn't vastly influenced by Harry Potter, which is, I mean, it was a cultural phenomenon,
It
really.
is. It is a phenomenon because there's so many good series out there, but that one just it's almost inexplicable
It
the way
is
that
actually, it really
it's
is.
truly a phenomenon.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I was
sometimes there's just, it doesn't there's no way to explain it. I think you're right that
yeah,
the way it just sort of took off and touched so many people, and then it became its
right,
own thing, really.
right. Yeah. So I'm very happy that I was a part of that. So got to
Yeah,
grow up with that kind of phenomenon going on.
yeah, yeah. I'm a little envious of you.
You were part of it too, just on the other
I
end.
was, yeah, I was in that sense, and of course, when I was a kid, I had Star Wars and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I've completely missed the Star Wars train that it just passed me by.
You probably were at the wrong age, right? Because there was the 70s and early 80s. That was my Star Wars. And then there
Right.
was the prequels, which were
Yeah.
what, late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I remember I saw the prequels, right? So I think it was the first prequel that came out. I saw
Okay.
that just kind of cold turkey because I hadn't seen the other ones, and my dad
Ah.
wanted to see it, and I was like, "What is this?" I think I just missed the train, and also I guess I wasn't introduced to it in a very nice way. Not nice, but very thorough way, where I was like, this is, I don't know what's happening. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
but everyone has their fandom. So,
That's true. And it's not your fault you weren't born in the 70s when the real Star Wars came out. So yeah.
yeah, I'll work on that.
So
Um,
so you had, of course, Harry Potter and
mhm.
um
And then I would say, which is a very stereotypical answer for people who love fantasy, but Lord of the Rings was
yeah.
the next one in like my before I was an adult kind of years that really sunk its teeth into me. But some people may think this is blasphemous, but I was actually introduced through the movies first, and
Uh-huh.
then
Yeah.
books.
Oh, I think nowadays that again, and I'm totally generalizing here, but people of your generation probably are much more likely to have been exposed to Lord of the Rings first through the films, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going on the assumption that most people under 40
Mm,
probably knew the
yeah.
films before the books. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was obsessed. Okay. The only word to describe it is obsessed.
Wow. Because of the films first.
Yes, I was determined
Oh,
to become Legolas. I was ready.
nice. Nice. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So through the movies, I then read the books and fell in love with those as well. So that story meant a lot to me growing up as well.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Yeah, it was Lord of the Rings, the books for me, because I was an adult, and when the films came out, and already a very hardcore Tolkien fan. So
Mhm.
it was definitely the books for me. I, as a 12, 13-year-old, read them first, and
Mhm.
they're the biggest probably influence in my life, really. So
I mean, the story, regardless of whether people like the way the books are written, because I do think there's an argument for that's not for everyone. But I think the story at its core and what it deals with is pretty universal and can be applied throughout the ages, And I think that's why some stories just last, because they strike a chord, you know.
yeah, yeah, no, Tolkien definitely did, and for a lot of people, and in a way that I think it's good that we're getting away from. Don't get me
Mm.
wrong, I love Tolkien,
Mhm.
but I think fantasy has needed to move on for quite some time, because he
Right.
exerted such a powerful influence. I mean, even after the 80s, when everybody was trying to be the next Tolkien, and you had some pretty close imitations of
Mhm.
Tolkien. Even after that, I think he still exerted a extremely powerful influence. And I am glad that fantasy has become, I think it's moved on in the sense that we don't no longer think that fantasy has to be, like a medieval, pseudo medieval world, or
Right,
European,
right.
Eurocentric, or anything like that. So fantasy is becoming much more diverse now, which is
Yeah.
great. I think at a certain point we'll be able to look back at Tolkien's contribution to the genre with a sense of appreciation. But there was a definite need, I think, at a certain point to sort of let's get on with it. Let's do
Mhm.
new things with this incredible genre where we use our imaginations and uh,
Right, right.
right, yeah,
Oh, I definitely agree. I think you can enjoy Lord of the Rings for what it is and not want to read 10 more of them, if that makes
right,
sense. Like
yeah,
you already have that, so you don't necessarily need another one. So I definitely agree with you that it was high time to just kind of let people explore more, with
yeah.
what's out there. And I think we definitely see that in fantasy today. So,
Yes, yes, we definitely do. And to the extent that um, maybe even doing something a little more Tolkien-esque is almost original now. We've gone full
right,
circle almost, right?
right.
Um,
Right? Yeah, we've done the grimdark cycle, we're going around,
I
coming
feel
back around.
like we're doing that. We're pretty far along in the grimdark cycle, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that comes up on like page chewing a lot on Steve's channel because his main wheelhouse is usually horror and like darker fantasy.
Yes. Yeah. He likes
Uh,
that stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And so do I, don't get me wrong. But I
Yeah.
do think the topic often comes up when we talk to people over there. And by over there, I mean his channel. Was a weird
Yes.
way to phrase that. But
Yeah.
um grimdark is just such an interesting phenomenon where I mean this is just my theory. I have zero evidence to back this up, but I think
Yeah.
Game of Thrones really contributed, like the show Game of Thrones really contributed to grimdark just taking off the way that it did because
I
it
agree.
expanded that type of storytelling to so many people. They're like, oh, I didn't know fantasy could be this vicious or you know
Yeah.
this bloody or that kind of thing, and people were really into it.
Yeah. Which is in a way maybe I mean, grimdark is much older than Martin, of course. But I agree with you that he
Mm-mm.
gave it that mode a lot more, whatever you would call it. I mean, the label's probably a little bit deceptive, but but he gave that type of storytelling much more momentum. I think that's
Mhm.
true. And the show obviously really just compounded that.
Yeah.
So that it had a huge influence on the genre, and a lot of people obviously kind of thought, okay, yeah, this is cool. I like this, and I'd like to try this. And
Yeah.
we've gone there. I also think that grimdark, if you go back to some of the earlier stuff too, before Martin, if you go back to writers like, and I haven't read Gemmell yet, but he's obviously one of them,
Mhm.
and Michael Moorcock and others who were doing grimdark before it was called grimdark.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's, I think, a degree to which grimdark, if we think of it this way, the way, I guess this is sort of how I think about it, is a lot of it is, I think it's a way of bringing modernism into fantasy.
Mm.
Modernism being, in literature, often an exploration of our alienation and our sense that the universe doesn't have an intrinsic meaning to it, that we're sort of on our own here in this sort of hostile world where you're stuck carving out meaning for yourself, you know.
Yeah.
And that I think is sort of something we see much earlier in many other literary genres. And fantasy was kind of a conservative genre in some ways, and so it sort of, I think, hit maybe a little bit later.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
that, to me, that's what I think of as grimdark, is sort of modernism in fantasy, where we see the
Mhm.
human being as essentially struggling to create meaning for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, what do you think about that? But that's kind of how I think of it.
I think that's a really good way to put it. I think I've had that feeling for a while, but haven't been sure what words to use. But I think modernization is one that really works for the
Mm.
way I view it as well. Because, when you say fantasy was a bit conservative, I think it was also an idealistic genre for a long time,
Yes.
being a paragon of good or a paragon of evil. And I think Grimdark's really strives to make that not the case.
The moral grayness thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to go
So
into the
right.
nitty-gritty nature of humans. And that often what I say, and the reason that I enjoy Grimdark is it allows us a bit of a distance from horrendous things to be able to look at them through a more objective lens. And that allows us to reflect. Because
Yeah.
if it's something close to you or something in real life, of course, it's going to affect you a bit more emotionally, a bit more raw than if it's something that you're reading and you can put it down. So I think Grimdark is almost like a mirror. It allows us to look at ourselves. I
Yeah.
kind of see it that way.
Oh, that's beautifully said. And I've always felt that there is an honesty to grimdark that I
Mhm.
admire. I'm not the best read, if in books that are labeled grimdark, but I've read a fair number, and
Yeah.
I feel like grimdark is more honest. It's not more violent than other
Mm,
types of fantasy, in fact,
mm,
but it's more
yeah.
honest about the violence, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of times in epic fantasy and high fantasy, the violence tends to be idealized, and we don't get the sense of just visceral fear and
Mm, mm, mm.
blood and guts, which is really,
Yeah.
actually real violence is
Is like that, right? Yeah.
that. Yeah. So I feel like grimdark is more honest about the violence, not that it's more violent, if that makes sense.
No, that's a really good way to put it. I definitely would agree with that. Um, and I think there's a place for both. I mean, surprise, I like Sanderson. I don't know if you could tell, but that I have that behind me. But Sanderson is much more of the idealized version of that, right? So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
there's a place for both of those things. And I just find
Yep.
it so interesting when we were talking, a second ago, we mentioned the cycle idea, how we go through what's popular and what's not, right? So I think, and this is, people might be angry at me for saying this, but I do think grimdark being Grimdark being the king of the genre might be a little bit on its way out, I think.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Trend is kind of going down. And that might be connected to the way people feel in real life, right? Because I said it was a mirror. So if things aren't going so well, maybe you don't want to look in the mirror in your free time for a little bit. Like, I don't really want to read about how humanity sucks because I know that. I kind of know that from my real life right now. So,
Yeah, and I think that we often, so a lot of times people use the word escapism as a bad thing,
yeah.
but actually there is a place for it. And I think Tolkien's famous way of putting it was, and it's interesting because he's also definitely more on the more idealized side than on the realist side, I think, of the genre.
Yeah.
But though I love the way he put it, though, which is, well, what you have to ask the question, then what are we escaping from?
Mm,
And I thought that was a brilliant way. That's in his essay on fairy stories.
okay.
That's where he poses that. And he says, well, what exactly are we escaping from here? And
Mm,
I think it's a good way to look at it, because not only are we escaping from a world that has all kinds of unpleasantness, but we're escaping from the mentality that produced that world for a while.
mm, mm,
And by doing so, we become able to question that mentality, to
mm.
come back from that story with a different perspective. So I just like the way he put it there. And that's
Yeah.
one way of thinking about it too, I think.
No, I agree. That's beautiful.
Alternative visions, because he was an environmentalist.
Mm.
He was lamenting, as you know, and he's fairly explicit about it in his books.
Yeah.
He hated it when people cut down trees,
Mhm.
and that sort of orcish behavior of despoiling the countryside,
Right.
and making life around us ugly for the sake of, power and wealth
Industry. Yeah.
and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you know, I think like you said, he made such a mark, and rightfully so, on the genre. And I think we can still take lessons from him today. But I am excited to see the new cycle coming through. And I
Yes.
think, talking about the online community, how we can learn from each other that we mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
this online community has expanded who I'm aware of, what books I'm aware of, just exponentially.
Yeah.
So, um, the just to kind of finish off the question of books that impacted my life.
Yes, I wanted to get back to that. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, let's bring it full circle. Let's come back. But as an adult, there are a couple things that have impacted me. One of them was in university, actually. And one of the people who made me interested in becoming a teacher, because there was a literature professor there who taught Victorian literature, very niche. And I was not an English major. I was a linguistics major. So I had no business being in this man's class. But I took one of his beginner, like lower level classes, and I was like, this man is one of the best teachers I have ever encountered in my life. He was
Wow.
incredible at his job, and he could make Victorian literature like nail-bitingly interesting, which is just a gift. So if you can make that interesting. And so he always joked with me, because I always showed up in his classes. He's like, are you an English major yet? I'm like, nope, I only take your classes. As like an extra credit thing.
By the way, that's a huge compliment from him to you.
Really?
Oh,
You think
yeah.
so?
Yeah, that means that he really enjoyed you as a student, and that
Oh,
he thought highly of you, and would have, and obviously saw something in you that he believed would have been an awesome English major. So,
yeah. He almost got me, but linguistics had my heart. But
yeah.
so that his classes gave me an appreciation for that particular time frame of literature. So I'm not super well read in classics outside of that time frame, but I've read a lot in that time frame.
Mhm.
And so it's not exactly a book, but there's a poem by William Wordsworth called
Ah,
We Are Seven.
oh, I know it. Yeah.
Yep. And that poem it's so simple, but so beautiful. And he has so much to say in that poem that that one really impacted me and still does to this day, like
Yeah.
a little girl standing up to the establishment. There's so many layers to that, but just the simple words, "We are seven," it symbolizes so many things. So that was a work of art to me, that
Yeah.
poem.
Yeah, that's a beautiful poem. And as you say, it's a little girl who's being told about some reality which she is resisting. And I guess is it spoiler? Can you spoil a poem?
I think we can spoil it. So we can spoil a
Yeah.
poem. Yeah.
So her deceased siblings and the person questioning her is insisting, no, you're no longer seven
Right.
because these have passed away, and so she's, no,
Yeah.
we're seven.
Yeah, there's seven of us, right? So
Yeah.
it's in the character who's questioning her is a schoolmaster, right? Who is
Yeah.
a very repetitive character in that genre of literature, as the a representation of society and what society should be, and following societal rules. And so he's the one questioning her about her reality, and she's like, "No, I don't agree with that." And when I first read it, I just thought it was kind of odd. And then after thinking about it, it became clearer to me, as poetry often does. So that just really impacted me a lot.
Yeah, and of course, as you know, Wordsworth was doing something fairly revolutionary in the process of, and he and Coleridge articulated this pretty well together, but they wanted to include other voices that weren't traditionally part of poetry, which was prior to that time, to the Romantic era, very stylized and very specific in what it could do. And Wordsworth said, no, you can do this and that, and we can use poetry to do, to have the voices of the common people and all kinds of other things. And so that's what he was doing. He was it's difficult for us to appreciate just how revolutionary that was at the time, when he was writing poetry in the late 18th, early 19th century. So
yeah, I mean, the system of society at the time was a caste system, essentially. It was just, you're born where you're born and you better stay there. And so to that, I think revolutionary is a very good word to put into it. It was a revolutionary act. And not only did he include people that aren't usually included, but it was very much implied that they were in the right. And that was, woo, spicy for that time.
Yes. Very much so.
Yeah. So that whole class for sure, but I think that poem maybe just kind of stands for what that class meant for me in university, and just kind of rekindled my love for classics in general at that time.
Oh, I think it's fantastic that We Are Seven is sort of that, an emblem of all of that for you. It's a great poem. I love Wordsworth's poetry.
Yeah. Talented person.
Yeah, though I'm a medievalist, I actually read a lot of 19th century literature. It was kind of almost like a secondary focus for me because I was interested in 19th century medievalism.
Okay.
Which is also a response to the rise of industrialization and in many respects the rise of capitalism as a new world order. Medievalism was like modern fantasy, a sort of a counterculture. And in some ways,
I'm aware of that. That's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the medieval leaning people of the period were responding to industrialization and capitalism and saying, no, we're destroying the world and we need to go back to, and they really idealized the Middle Ages. So it wasn't historically accurate in many respects. So they saw the medieval times as much more communal, or some of them were actually very reactionary and wanted to assert a hierarchy and say, no, we need to go back to this order where the one percenters take care of all of the lowly people beneath them, and it's a symbiotic relationship, but somebody has to be at the top. Others, though, like William Morris, the guy I wrote my dissertation on, took it in a different direction, where his vision of particularly the earlier Middle Ages, Dark Ages, that sort of thing, was of a more communal model of society.
Mm.
Yeah, it was definitely used as an assertion of what the present ought to be, these ideals
Right.
about the past. But yeah, it
Right.
was very much in reaction to the social ills, which, as you know, since you read a fair amount of 19th century literature, a lot of
Sure,
people.
social ills is a nice way to put it.
Yeah, it's
It's
almost a
not pretty.
euphemism. Yeah, a lot of people were getting just grinded to death in that time and place in order to make a few people rich.
Yeah. I mean, I read Bleak House once in my life, and I'm good with once. But
Yeah,
I understand why that book is so important, because it is a snapshot at the time, and just
yep,
one that's unrelenting in its honesty of what that time was. But
yep.
ooh, man, it's just talk about being grinded to dust. Like,
Yeah, and you know
yeah.
who's reproduced that, I think, brilliantly in when I read this trilogy, I was thinking, okay, Abercrombie has read Dickens. He's
Mm,
probably read Elizabeth Gaskell, North and
mm,
South, that sort of thing. Age
mm.
of Madness is all about exactly
Really?
what we're talking about. Yeah, his Age of Madness
Really?
trilogy, which is to me the best of Abercrombie. I don't know. Have you read Abercrombie's First Law stuff yet?
I have read The Blade itself, so I haven't read the other two, but I started my Abercrombie journey. I'm getting there.
Okay, cool. So the best Abercrombie, in my opinion, is Age of Madness
Mm,
because number one, he explores these social themes that we're talking
mm,
about in a way
mm,
that is very reflective of what a lot of 19th century authors were doing.
mm.
And number two, his best female characters by far are in Age of
Mm.
Madness. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And he just, I think he's getting better and better as a writer, in my opinion. And a lot
Mm.
of people disagree with me because the characters in the original trilogy are so dear to them. But,
Right.
you know,
Right.
oh,
Yeah, I mean, I'm a character-based reader for sure. So, that's a way to get me if you say the characters are good. So, I
mm.
did finish The Blade itself. Actually, I think that was at the beginning of this month. What is time? I think it was at the beginning of this month when I finished it.
Okay, pretty
Uh,
recently. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and so I was warned ahead of time, plot where, like
Yeah.
it doesn't exist. So I was ready for that. And so, but I must admit, the first part of the book, I was kind of not enjoying it. I was not enjoying it. Not enjoying it is strong. It wasn't meeting my expectations, which were admittedly high. So let's put it that way. But then during the second part of the book, I couldn't put it down. So it took
Oh,
off.
cool. Okay.
So I think, Abercrombie is not like, oh, my new favorite author ever, but I definitely to continue, and hearing that, there's opinions out there that he gets better, as he continues, I'm excited because there's a lot to read. So,
Yes, yes, yeah. 10 books in all right now in the First Law world. And if you include Sharp Ends, the short story collection, which
mm,
I think is worth reading before you get to Age of Madness. But the
mm,
original trilogy, the standalones, the three standalones, then the
mm,
short story collection, and then Age of Madness. Yeah,
mm.
and it's one of my favorite. If you count it all as sort of like a series,
Yeah,
which I do,
yeah.
I think it's one of my definitely my top five, I would say. But we're talking about you, so
I'm an
we
interviewer too. We're just going back and forth interviewing each other.
yes. But this is a good way to go about it, I think, to go through your reading journey slowly, so we can talk about these reads a bit. But so
Yeah,
after what had we gotten to? Tolkien, and
yeah,
you talked about the college course where you did a lot of 19th century, and you mentioned that wonderful poem "We Are Seven." What
yes.
are some other big important reads for you?
I would say after university, I kind of had a gap in my reading life where I was reading, but very casually. I wasn't really, I was in new jobs and just busy with other things. So, um, but then when I settled back into my reading life, it was actually just before discovering BookTube, which is, I think, how I ended up discovering BookTube. I think I was looking up a review of something. And so I would say impactful reads after that, the first one that comes to mind is the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee.
I just bought that. Yeah.
I love it. I adore it. It's one of those series that is so many things in one. It does so many things. The first book is, Jade City is more of a small focus, which isn't surprising considering the name is focused on a city. And at the core of it, I would argue it's a familial story at the core. And as a character-based reader, that really works for me. So I'm sure if you just purchased it, maybe you've heard the general gist of what it's about, or
I have an idea. I've heard a lot about The Godfather and that sort of thing. And so I have an idea. And I've watched interviews with Fonda Lee, who sounds like a really wonderful person and from what I hear, a very talented writer. So I had to buy those books, and I'm hoping maybe late this year, early next year, I could start on that trilogy. Yeah. So yeah, but sell me on it, please. I want to hear all about it.
You don't have to ask me twice.
Yeah.
but yeah, so the first book follows the main family, who I think the Godfather comparison is reasonable, but I try not to use buzzwords like that because I don't know people's expectations of the Godfather. But essentially it is like a gang family, kind of a mafia family, not kind of mafia family, but we follow the main siblings from that. We have 3 main siblings, and they exist in a world that has jade that imbues magical properties to those who wear it.
Cool.
So yeah, so it's not like innate magic per se. I wouldn't necessarily call it a magic system even, but you can be born with a higher tolerance or a lower tolerance to it. And those who run the mafia, in their blood is basically a higher tolerance. So it allows them to wear more jade and have more power. And the first book explores how this functions in the city. So not only is jade the source of the magic, but it's also a commodity. So it can be used and bought and sold and trafficked, and it's just a really interesting way to explore magic in a fantasy world. And it really brings in a lot of power dynamics as well that maybe other innate magic systems may not.
Okay.
So there's a lot of exploration of that. And
cool.
Then
so I think you're helping me here to understand there's some themes that she's weaving into this as well, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And she's doing it very purposefully because throughout the trilogy they continue. And then the main story is essentially we have the main family versus the other main mafia family. Okay. And they have issues with each other. So yeah, problems arise between the two. And so the first book, like I said, is more focused on the city. And then the second book is called Jade War, and it expands more globally. And you get to see how not just that city, but that country that city is in interacts with the rest of the world. Because like I said, jade is a commodity, right? And then from that, you have Jade Legacy. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say this because the legacy is in the description, but Fonda Lee does play with time skips and does it in a way that I haven't seen many other authors pull off. Because sometimes you just miss the characters that you were with, you're like, oh, I don't want these new characters, But, she does a great job handling time skips in this world. So
cool.
Fantastic.
Very cool. So in the way that, say, an author like N.K. Jemisin does in Broken Earth, would you compare the time skips to sort of like what she does, or
a little bit more linear, I would say, than N.K. Jemisin does, but still in the way that with N.K. Jemisin the time skips are purposeful, and you know enough about the characters and what would have happened in that time that you're not disoriented during the skip. Like you can fill in the blanks. Fonda Lee also does the groundwork so that you can go with her when she skips, and you're like, oh, okay, I can see how this would have happened, while we were gone, kind of thing.
Cool.
Yeah,
Cool. Wow. Okay. You're good sales job. Thank you.
thank you. um, so it's just a wonderful series. But for me, one of the things that really meant a lot to me for that book is, I live in Japan, and it is a fantasy based or Asian based fantasy series. And
Okay.
I've married into a Japanese family. My husband is Japanese.
Yeah.
So it meant, I'm not, of course, not Asian myself, but it meant so much to see that clearly and respectfully and so well represented, because the
Mhm.
culture developed there is just beautiful. And the discussion that she has of being part of a diaspora,
Ah,
also a big conversation. And that hit home for me as someone who has lived 6 years in a culture that was new to me. I'm used to it now, obviously, but
yeah.
that I
Yeah.
wasn't born into. That type of theme really works for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an important theme. Uh, a lot of people, anyone who has experienced living abroad for a significant amount of time, and the dislocation, I guess. It's
Yes.
interesting. In my experience, and I've lived abroad myself, but always with the eye of coming back to the States. So I don't think it's quite the same as someone who lives abroad and kind of feels like this is going to be this is where I'm going to end up, that I'm going to stay here in this place. I'm the immigrant, I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if the sense of, and maybe dislocation is a bit harsh way to say it, but is that something that ever goes away for someone in that experience? In other words, you could say, yeah, I've lived here for 30 years or 40 years, but I still feel like I'm. And then, of course, going back to the original place, that place has not stayed stagnant while you've been
Right.
away. So you go
Yeah.
back there and you also feel a bit like a foreigner too, I suppose, in some ways. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. You're speaking words from my heart right now.
I
Yep.
mean, you know what I mean better than I know what I mean, I think. Yeah.
I think, well, to answer the first part of it about being here, I think Japan is a very unique experience in feeling not isolated, that's not the word I'm looking for, but in feeling different,
Uh-huh.
because it's such a homogenous society. And the government loves when people visit, but they don't want people to stay.
Uh-huh.
they don't
Uh-huh.
they don't want foreigners staying here. So um but where I live in Fukuoka is not as westernized or doesn't have as many foreigners as somewhere like Tokyo might have.
Uh-huh.
So we exist, of course, but you will still get, old ladies looking at you like they've never seen someone that isn't Japanese in their life. Like that is an occurrence that I often get. Or, kids, bless them, they have no filter, so just,
Oh, I've
like the
experienced
brain.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I think it's a very unique experience here because it's such a homogenized place. But yeah, that feeling never really goes away, I would say. People still tell me, and I've lived here for 6 years now, if I go out to eat with someone and I use chopsticks, they're like, "Oh my God, you're so good at chopsticks,"
Uh-huh.
and I'm like, "Thank you." Like, I practice every day, so and they mean well. They don't mean, to upset me, but
Yeah.
um it is one of those things where, I mean, it's not that I would like to be Japanese, because that's not a goal of mine, but it'd be nice to not be a spectacle sometimes, for sure.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but,
Which constantly reminds you that you're different, or that
mhm.
some people might feel that that it's nice to have you visit, but that you don't actually belong here.
I've
That
met a
sort of thing.
couple of those people personally. Yeah, most of my interactions are pleasant, but there have been some that made it very clear that they do not wish my person to be here. So those were not good experiences.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's unfortunate. It's part of the human story everywhere, I think, where and this goes back to, I know that in the period that I'm most familiar with as a scholar, medieval times, there were lots of immigrants, and often, guess what happened to immigrants when times were tough? They got blamed for everything. So
Yeah.
it's an old story, unfortunately, that the people who are a little bit different, the in group tends to focus on them and otherize them and find ways to creatively blame them for everything that's wrong.
Yeah, I think the othering is definitely a thing, but also grouping everyone together is a thing. So,
Yeah,
um, what's interesting, and I think maybe people who live in the West don't realize, is the East is not, this sounds crazy to say, but the East part of the world is not West centric.
right.
So anyone from the West is foreigner, and they have a name for that in Japanese called gaijin.
Yeah,
They're just all kind of, they don't care if you're from France or America or, where Africa, wherever you're from, you're just a gaijin. But if you're from within Asia, then they have specific,
yep,
labels for those things. So if you are part of that foreign group, if someone comes over and does something terrible, which people do because humans are humans, maybe they rent out an apartment and then they don't pay the rent, or they skip out on the person, and the landlord loses money. That person, and I've experienced this personally, will no longer rent to anyone who falls into that foreigner category,
uh-huh,
because like, I had a bad experience and therefore you're going to do this too. So it's actually really hard, if you're not married or have a job connection, to get an apartment as a foreigner. Like, a
yeah.
lot of people won't rent to you.
Wow.
So it's an interesting experience. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, and I think anyone who's an immigrant here in the United States could report similar interactions, I'm afraid.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
funny because we celebrate the positive sides of all of this, the fact that you have lived in different places and interacted with all kinds of folks and has made you a richer person, and you've seen the universality of human experience and all of that. And then there's the flip side of it that we're talking about too. So
Yeah, it's not all rainbows and butterflies,
yeah,
that's for
yeah.
sure. Um,
It
but
reminds me
it,
some, go ahead,
yeah,
sorry.
I was just gonna say it teaches you a lot about yourself.
Oh my goodness, it sure does. Yeah, there's the best way to learn about yourself is to go live somewhere where you weren't raised. Yeah. It's
Mhm.
really quite something. Yeah. I was just going to say it reminds me of a student. I think I've told this story on a different episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy, but I had a student who was born in Colombia and described, as we were reading an essay by Amy Tan called Fish
Mhm.
Cheeks. Um,
Okay.
and it's about it's a sort of I think it's more or less autobiographical, this particular essay. It's very short, it's like a page long, but it was a story of when she was a teenager and somewhat humiliated when her family, her parents were originally from China, invited the minister over, who the minister being a white man and his family being white and being native born Americans, and the fact that she had a crush on the minister's son made it even worse. And it was just sort of an embarrassment to her that when they served all these very Chinese dishes
Right.
and so on and so forth. And her parents, her mother particularly, mothers are very perceptive. You can't escape
Yeah.
from mothers.
No,
Um,
they know. They know.
Perceived this, that her embarrassment, and uh, gave her a kind of lesson. It was around Christmas, so she gave her a Christmas present of a mini skirt and said, "Okay, yeah, fine, you can be American. Here's a mini skirt." I don't know if that says about Americans, but
It, just, all right.
also don't forget that you're Chinese. That's part of who you are.
Mm,
So it was a
mm,
very interesting story, and we talk as a class about negotiating, being a person in that space where you're neither this nor that, or you're in the middle, or you're both, or whatever, and how hard that can
yeah.
be sometimes to be both.
Yeah.
And my student from Colombia said, yeah, it's funny because I never feel really accepted here in the United
Mhm.
States 100%. I always get messages that I'm foreign, that I'm different, that I don't belong.
Mm,
And yet when I go back to Colombia, my relatives and former friends there will say, you're not one of us.
yeah.
You're up there, so that he says, I don't know where I belong. I feel like I'm in this limbo. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm lucky enough that where I'm from in America is enough of like a melting pot vibe that it's not, I don't stick out like a sore thumb, with my mannerisms when I do come back. Cause I do find that I have Japanese mannerisms that don't,
Oh, I'm
don't match.
sure. Yeah.
When I go home, they're like, why are you, again, an example, why are you taking off your shoes? Like you don't need to here. And I just instinctively take my shoes off whenever I'm indoors anywhere. And they're like, why? So that's
I
just
do
one of,
too, by the way, because I lived in a different part of Asia, but
oh.
I don't wear shoes in the house either. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've been converted to that. Like it just feels,
Yeah.
I don't like doing it anymore. But
Yeah.
um so I wouldn't say it feels alienated when I go back per se, alienating, but like you mentioned, and I think you put it perfectly, that place has moved on, right? America, where I'm from, has moved on when I come back. I'm like, wait a minute, how dare this change? Like this is not how it was when I left.
Yeah.
um so there is a feeling of just kind of, okay, where am I? Discombobulation, whenever I come home. So, and my family means well, but it's always, when are you coming home? You've been gone for so long. And I'm like, well, part of my life is there now. So I don't really
Yeah.
know how to answer this.
And it's a long trip too. Yeah.
14 hours on a plane.
Whoa. Yeah.
The best.
Having been 14 plus hours on a plane quite a few times, I can tell you it's misery. Yeah.
It really is. Like even before the pandemic, and like in Asia, from living here, of course, as well, but like masks are not a political statement. They're just a thing, and they were a
Yeah.
thing before the pandemic and will be a thing after. So I got into the habit of wearing moisture masks on the plane with the little moisture pads. And I'm
Ah,
telling you, if you can get those online next time you have a long haul flight, lifesavers.
good tip. Yeah. Good tip. Yeah.
I know, watching, but
So were there any other books? We got to Jade, the Greenbone Saga. So
yeah.
what are other
Um,
important reads for you that we might even find you talking about on your channel sometimes?
Yes, that is a very, very good question. Well, basically, any books that you see behind me on the channel as well. I'm on the lower
Cool.
shelves, but you'll see the ones on the upper shelves.
I can see some John Gwynn there.
Yes, there is Shadow of the Gods. I've got Gunmetal Gods here. Legacy of the Brightwash. That's a good one.
Okay.
That one. Well, I would say either we could talk about Legacy of the Brightwash as well, and then the other one that comes to mind is the Dandelion Dynasty. That one.
Oh, yeah, I'm very curious about that. Well, I'd love to hear about both. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, Legacy of the Brightwash is a self-pub book by Crystal Matar, and it's one of I've read a lot of good self-published books at this point. I'm very, happy to say, but that one just stands head and shoulders above for me right now
Wow.
because of the character work that she puts into it. I've mentioned a couple times already that that's a way to get me, but um basically we follow our main character Tashue, who's like a cop in his world,
Okay.
and in the world that he inhabits, magic is deemed illegal. So anyone whose magic quickens or shows itself is then not illegal, but like a controlled substance. So the
Hmm.
government will then put you in basically indentured servitude and make you work using your magic to like light the lights of the city or move the trams or um and if you don't comply with what the government wants you to do, then you're thrown in this horrible prison. And so we follow Tashue, who is a police officer who enforces these rules. And then one day his son's magic quickens and
Ooh.
he's forced to put his son in the prison because his son won't comply. And so he's starting to have this internal struggle about the laws that he's been upholding. And then at the
Wow.
same time, yeah, a young girl washes up dead on the shore of the river. and he's determined to figure out what happened to this little girl, because it's not a spoiler to say, but she has no arms and no legs. And so they're like, what is happening here? And so basically there's these two aspects, and then we follow Toshue as he figures that stuff out, and it's
Wow.
just such a good book.
Yeah, the whole premise sounds really compelling. Yeah.
Yeah. So that one as well, but I would say the other huge one would be Dandelion Dynasty.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
can't shut up about that series. So
Yeah,
if
I
it,
mean, I've heard a lot of people recently, like Patrick Leo and Jimmy Nuts and some others, just praising that series. So of course, I have to check it out.
yeah.
But you finished the whole. It's 4 books, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's 4 books. They are massive. So
Okay.
it's they're not ones to speed through, although it's hard not to speed through them because you want to continue reading. But we're actually very lucky, just a little plug here, that Steve and I were able to interview him on Page Chewing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
unfortunately PL couldn't join us for the episode, which is like just heartbreaking. But yeah, so we were able to talk to him about the series, and I convinced Steve to read it too. I've been poking at him for a while. He finally.
Oh, cool. He actually sounds really brilliant. I saw some of actually I've heard him in a couple interviews now.
Mhm.
He sounds really smart.
Yeah, it's almost dazzling. His smarts are almost dazzling when you're talking to him. But
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier modernity with in regards to grimdark, and he was talking about, because I asked him in the interview, how would you explain the Dandelion Dynasty? Because when I try to explain it to people, it's so big in scope and it deals with so much that I don't really know what to tell people, because what you have in the first book is so different from what you have in the last book. And so he said it's it's like an epic story, but combined with elements of modernity. And he wanted to showcase that in a non-Western, it didn't necessarily have to be one place, but non-Western viewpoint. He wanted to tell that from that perspective. And so the first book, The Grace of Kings, is basically like the epic historical story of that world. And it gives the basis that then builds for the next 3 books. So the first book does feel a little bit different from the later 3 because it's written more like an epic story that the characters can all then refer to after that. So yeah, it's
Cool.
fantastic.
Wow. Yeah, well, I think next year is gonna have to be next year.
Yeah.
Because I've got so much to read. I'm not even gonna finish everything I want to finish for the rest of this year, but that's on my list.
Yeah.
Dynasty, it's there. So
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I'm loving
Would you
it.
mind me asking, even though it's my interview, do you have a book that you would recommend that I should add to my TBR?
Oh, wow.
Because I love the way that you think about things and the way that you dissect books, and it seems like we enjoy a lot of the same themes. So I'm just curious, not to put you on the spot, and if you can't, you can't. But is there something that you think I would enjoy?
So obviously you already read Broken Earth trilogy.
Yes, I haven't finished the last book.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I love that. But have you read Malazan yet?
No. Yeah.
Okay. Everyone's surprised. Philip Chase is going to recommend Malazan. So I mean, it's funny because of course I have talked to Steve a few times on his channel with his group that was reading Malazan, and recently I think he's been talking about with Layla, the 4th book, House of Chains, and so you know people reading the series already. And I'm sure you've heard, this and that about it.
Yes, I've heard it's a project, is what I've heard.
It is, of course. Yeah.
In a negative way, but it is just something you have to be ready to take on.
Well, just the fact that there are 10 very long books that's a commitment in and of itself. But I think you would appreciate how Malazan is also Stephen Erickson. And when we say Malazan, we're talking about Malazan Book of the Fallen, because there are lots of other series within the Malazan world by both Erickson and Ian Esselmont.
Okay.
But let's just stick to the Malazan Book of the Fallen for the moment.
Okay.
I'm not
Okay.
going to get too crazy here.
Okay.
But for Malazan Book of the Fallen, I think you would appreciate
Mm,
that Stephen Erickson, a few things that he does very deliberately. One
mhm.
is that he subverts a lot of tropes.
Okay.
And he, for example, in fantasy, a lot of us are used to the idea of the protagonist or group of protagonists, being the most important central thing in the story, and often being the heroes who save the day and that sort of thing.
Mm,
So there, and people could argue about this, but I think that what Erickson gives us in the Malazan Book of the Fallen is a much truer sense of our place in the universe, that there's no one person who's going to save the world or that sort of thing, and that we're
mm,
all in this incredibly intricate web of connection,
mm,
and that we can, what he does with people and how we often otherize and see the other people as so different and so foreign and hostile. What he does with that is so brilliant, because yes, of course, it's an epic fantasy and there's a lot of violence and stuff, but there are these beautiful moments of connection when two characters realize that they see themselves in each other, and they
mm,
might have been very different people, different races. There are these wonderful, because he's really exploring the theme of compassion in this series. That is at the heart of Malazan, is this exploration of this theme of compassion. Not that he
mm,
says, it's not a simple be compassionate and the world will be better or something like that.
mm,
He's exploring many facets of this theme,
mm,
as he does with identity and the idea that you think often this happens in Malazan. It happens a lot in fantasy in general, but it happens in a very special way, I think, in Malazan, where you think you know a character. You said, this is this character, and you put the character in the box.
mm,
And then something happens, you get a different perspective. Maybe you get that
mm.
character's perspective and you realize, oh wait, that box doesn't work anymore.
I see. Okay.
This character actually is much more than I thought. And that thing that character did that I thought was so awful, I think I sort of understand that a little better now. Not that
Mm,
I condone it necessarily, but so that happens all the time in
I
Malaz.
see. Okay.
So Erickson challenges the reader's expectations a
Mm,
lot,
mm,
by not having a central protagonist or group of protagonists, by going about the narrative, and you don't realize this really until you read the very last book, The Crippled God. But
mm,
he does things that you don't expect, and you realize, okay, he's gone about this whole narrative in a way that's really surprised me. Every book surprises you in some way, because
mm.
he does something different with each book, but also the series as a whole. So it's like a fractal in many ways. This series,
Okay.
he's very deliberate, and things that happen in even the first book have payoff in the very last book in ways you never might have expected.
Mm,
It's
mm.
incredibly intricate in that sense as well.
Okay.
And I will say that no author has made me cry as much as or as consistently as Stephen
Okay.
Erickson. And it's always, not always, but almost always in moments of joy.
Mm,
There's sorrow very much mixed in with the joy, but it's predominantly joy,
mm,
that I
mm,
feel when he moves me in ways that are
mm.
just so human.
Yeah.
I just think that it's just great literature, and he doesn't do what's expected in the genre. That throws people a lot, I think. And that's
Okay.
why a lot of people say, oh, this is so complicated and this is so hard. It's not, I think it's not that it's more complex than other big long series. They're all big, they have a lot of names, a lot of places. It's just that
Mm,
he does the unexpected, I think, a lot more. And that challenges people, and you're like, what is this? And then you I think if you're willing to wrestle with it, you realize what he's done with this, instead of just like, I don't get this, let's just DNF it or whatever.
Okay.
If you stick with it, I think a lot of Malazan fans will tell you that when they first tried to engage with the series, they almost gave up, or that they did give up the first 3 times. Gardens of the Moon, I don't get this. But when they finally got it, it became the most profound reading experience of their lives.
Okay.
So it's just, that's how it is, and it's kind of it's different, but also just so very moving and transformative. It's been really something for me. So anyway, I don't know if that makes any sense, anything I just said, but
No, it did. That's a good elevator pitch for sure. I mean, it's one of those things where you are not the only person who's recommended it to me. I've had people from all walks of life and basically all sections of my book life, recommend it to me at this point. So I think it's not a matter of if, it's just kind of when, because it sounds like something that I'll want to be in the right headspace for, and make sure that I can give my time to it. So, I'm sure there'll be an announcement on my channel when it happens, it's happening,
yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. And the cool thing is you're part of a community, so if you ever have questions or something, or you want to talk about it,
I'll bother you. I'll be like,
Good, absolutely do. And another cool thing about it is that he and Esselmont, when they created this world together, it's not that there isn't misogyny and patriarchy, because it exists, but it's a world where they deliberately went about structuring it in a way that women have just as much access to power as men do, because a lot of it is on the basis of magic. And in fact, women play extremely crucial roles, some of the most crucial, honestly, in the series. So it's in that sense, I think one of the more, we talked about how fantasy is this, we can imagine worlds that don't exist, and they've imagined a world that is much more egalitarian than ours, in many ways. So
that's really nice to hear, because one of the reasons why I love the Dandelion Dynasty so much is the women. Like Ken Liu can write women like no one else I've ever seen. So
cool.
Hearing you say that makes me quite interested as well.
Malazan,
that reason.
Cool. Well, we'll see, and I'm absolutely totally happy to if you ever do start it, to be a person who can hear what you want to say about it.
Thank you. I'll send you all the hate mail. This is terrible.
You can do that too. What were you thinking?
I won't. I'm sure I'm gonna like it. Enough people have recommended it that like I'll trust no one's recommendation if I end up hating it. So so many people have said you got to read it. So
I have a feeling that you would enjoy the ways in which Erikson challenges our expectations.
I like that stuff. So I think you nailed it. Thanks for the rec.
Well, you mentioned P.L. Stewart earlier, and I know you've read A Drowned Kingdom.
I have, yes.
Drowned Kingdom. I was hoping you could do a little sales pitch on that for me too.
I can. I have it, so hold on.
Awesome. It's always good to hold up the book.
Can't reach it. Hold on. It might be just out of reach.
Uh-oh.
But I'll do this for PL. Hold on.
Just for you, PL. He'll appreciate it.
Grab that.
Because I haven't read it yet. It's something I increasingly realize that I'm going to want to read. So, but I haven't had anyone kind of sell it to me yet. So, what is Drowned Kingdom?
Well, I am honored. So, Drowned Kingdom by P.L. Stewart, who is also, just for those of you who are watching, if you don't know, he's the other host for Page Doing. So it's myself, Steve, and PL. So PL did a retelling of Atlantis. So what would happen if the people who lived on, Atlantis when it was above the ocean, right? So the people who lived on that island nation, what would happen when they were displaced, when the island is destroyed? So it's not a spoiler. No,
Yeah.
not a spoiler
I
alert
mean,
at
it does
all.
say a drowned kingdom on the cover.
Right.
So,
It's
yeah.
I think it might even be on the back.
Yeah.
But so we basically start the book with this kingdom being destroyed. And our main character is a prince named Othrin, who is not the first son, so he was not going to get the throne. So there was some political unrest and like power struggle there, which you find out more in detail. PL takes the time to make sure you understand where Othran is coming from before things happen. But I was gonna say before shit goes down, but you can edit that out.
Oh
I
no,
can't
that's fine.
hear
The
it, but
occasional, potty word is okay.
okay. Um, so so we follow Othran as he figures out what he's going to do with his displaced kingdom, and he's kind of thrust into this position of leadership. But what's really interesting about his perspective, because it's a first person perspective, is he's arguably not a good person, and PL makes it very very clear that he's not. So misogynistic, racist, sexist, all of the ists, all of the isms you can imagine, Othran is that.
And he's extremely privileged too.
Extremely privileged, exactly. And so he views the world as his to take. And you see it very clearly, and PL wrote it, he's mentioned in interviews as well. He specifically wrote it that way. He wanted you to see what the world would look like from someone who comes from these different intersections of identity. And as someone who knows PL in person, I'm like, did he write this at certain points?
Yeah.
Because just how starkly just hurtful or harmful a lot of these things are, but there's a reason for it. He wants you to confront it, and you're also viewing it from first person perspective, which makes it feel much closer to you as a reader.
Wow.
So we follow, like I said, Othran is figuring out what to do, and he ends up this is not a spoiler, but interacting with other countries and other peoples, and it makes him, it's not like he realizes he's wrong and oh the world's great now, but it does allow for a conflict in a very intimate way because of the way you're reading the story, in a way that if you're looking from a bird's eye view, you might see person A, and person B are fighting, or their viewpoints are clashing, but because you're viewing from that intimate space, it hits different. It really hits different. And then another aspect of it that I love is PL really grapples with religion as a societal power structure, not just a belief system. So Othran's what's what I'm looking for. Othran's home place is a monotheistic religion. So there's one God, and very strongly believes that. And some other people that he encounters don't have that. They have multiple deities in their religion, different sources, magic, things like that. And he really deals with that as a power structure in society, not just a thing, not just a belief system. So really well done. I tabbed the crap out of this.
I can see that. That's a statement itself, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really, it's doing a lot. It's doing a lot, and it does it well. So highly recommend.
Wow. Okay. Another excellent sales job. You're making my TBR a lot longer here.
Apologies. Don't we all do that to each other?
I guess it's sort of part of the mission, but Taylor, come on. How am I going to read all these books now?
I heard the audiobook's good, just saying.
Oh, you know what? I'm a failure as an audiobook listener. I tried earlier this year, and it was like, I don't enjoy this. I don't like it. I keep feeling like I have to rewind all the time because that's the kind of reader I am. When I read, I often stop and I go back and I reread something I just read. And it's much more awkward to do that when it's, for me anyway. I mean, I'm sure people get good at it, I guess, right?
Practice does make perfect. For me, when I started audiobooks, I did them via thrillers. and nonfiction. That's how I got kind of my listening skills up, because I did try fantasy first and I was like, none of those names went in my brain from that, like, just shoot in one ear out the other.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely takes practice, but for me too, I prefer fantasy physical if I can.
Okay.
Other genres are great, be audio, but
So I tried it with a book very, very near and dear and familiar, which was The Fellowship of the Ring.
mm,
And the narrator was brilliant. Andy Serkis
yeah,
I
I've
mean,
wanted to try those.
he's awesome, but
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it.
Mhm.
I didn't feel like I was absorbing the story the way I usually would, like if I'm reading it.
Right.
And I'm just, yeah, that's just me. I mean, you can teach an old dog new tricks, but sometimes the dog has to work a lot harder.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
cool. Thank you for that on A Drowned Kingdom, because I've been wanting to hear more about it, and I will be having PL here on Dear Dog Fantasy, not too far from now, actually. So
Really?
yeah.
Well, just a shout out. People watch that episode. PL is wonderful. He's
Oh
just
yeah.
a force of good in this space. He really
Yeah.
truly is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. Very, very kind person, and
oh yeah.
kindness is something I think that is I don't know, I'm biased, of course, but I feel like it's very prevalent in our community.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of course, like I mentioned earlier, online discourse can feel vitriolic at times, but I would say that the majority of the interactions I've had with people in this community are from a place of kindness.
Yeah.
It's been pretty amazing actually to meet so many people who just like genuinely want to talk with you about books. I'm like, this is great.
It
You're
really
all good
is.
people. How is this? It seems too good to be true. You're all good people. You like books, It's great.
It really is. And I think we're still at the beginning of this,
Mm,
where BookTube is it's been around, I know, for more than a decade. And people who've been there from the beginning probably have a better sense of it than I do. But
hmm
I get the sense that we're just beginning to tap into the potential of this
mm,
platform when it
mm.
comes to celebrating books and discussing them and learning from each other. I feel like there's a lot could be happening in the coming years. It's exciting to me. It's a little bit of a Wild West kind of thing,
Yeah.
but it's also the potential of this platform is just tremendous. I mean, I look
Yeah.
at it, of course, I can't help it, and maybe you too, because you're an educator as well, but I look at it from kind of that pedagogical perspective. Like,
Mm,
look at what we can do with this, right?
right, right. Yeah, there is definitely a lot of potential here. And like I said, the increase in popularity of reading just in the general populace,
Yeah.
um, and book talk is interesting too. I don't have a TikTok.
I
I'm
don't either. Yeah.
I that's just it's not for me. And that just is what it is. But, when I went into bookstores the last time I was in the States, they had like the book talk table and things like that. So what I've often heard is that people might be introduced to book talk, become interested in a book, and then look at BookTube for the details of that book.
Oh,
Because
okay.
um book talk is more quick, right? So here are like 5 recommendations of this type of book if you're interested. But what I enjoy about BookTube is that you don't just get the recommendations, but you like get the long form content of
Right.
why you should read that book. So I think these two platforms could work in tandem in the future too.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because I have to admit I've been, without knowing a thing, so bad on me, dismissive of book talk,
I'm
because
guilty as well.
I have again, maybe this is the old educator in me, but I have this prejudice against very quick quick kinds of interactions in social media where it's like,
Yeah.
look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of, what actually do you get from this, all this stuff flashing in front of you? Like, I still haven't even reconciled myself to Twitter, where I feel like I don't really enjoy Twitter because I feel like I'm being bombarded with all these things and they're all like
Yeah.
1 second long. And
Yeah.
I really am comfortable on BookTube, especially with the longer form things. I get
Yeah.
inundated with emails these days to do shorts all the time. Like, do
Yeah.
shorts, grow your channel, do shorts.
Yeah.
You get them too, I'm sure.
Yes,
And
I do.
no judgment whatsoever, by the way, for any of my friends who are doing shorts. Good for you. I keep thinking, scratching my head, what could I do in a short? And
Yeah.
I I don't know. I mean, just doesn't, it's not me, I guess, but
I feel you. I feel you. Maybe because we, like you put it, are educators. I like to say everything together. Like,
yeah,
like this is what you should read, and this is why you should read it, not just this is what you should read. And that's just the way that
yeah,
I communicate. So I'm the same way. If you were to say, make a short about, I don't know, Greenbone Saga, I'd be like, like I really struggle to conceptualize.
yeah, yeah. And I had one person even on I have this top 10 fantasy video, which is, okay, it's 30 minutes long, which
Mm,
to me is like short. I mean, it's not, 30 minutes is nothing to talk about 10 different stories. I mean,
right,
that's like 3 minutes per story.
right.
And some people, and there's an array of responses to that. Some people are saying to me, "Wow, I appreciate you taking the time to actually talk about each of these books." And but then I'll
Mm,
get somebody who says, "Stop talking about the books. Just give us the list." And
yeah.
it's like, wait. And I actually sort of, I'll admit, it wasn't my best moment, but I responded in a snarky manner to one of
Yep.
those comments, and I said something like, "Well, I think what you're looking for might be on Book Talk, you know." If
Yep.
all you want is a list, then
And
that's,
that's where
go
you should
there.
go. Yeah.
But I think there is as you were saying, maybe there is a place for that shorter, if it's useful to people, and people seem to have very little time and shorter attention spans than ever before. So there is, I
There
still
is
sound,
space for that.
yeah,
I think, yeah, I mean, me personally, it doesn't work for me either. I also feel kind of bombarded
yeah,
with stuff. And also I always ask why. I'm annoying. So I ask why, read this, why, so um but while it doesn't work for me, I do think, like I said, if there's a way in the future with the potential of these two platforms growing, if there's a potential to connect and like have a link between,
yeah,
if you want to find out more, check out this video, that would be a really good way to grow both, I think, if we could manage that.
yeah. No, that's good insight. And I guess that's why the YouTube is doing the short. It's, I assume it's their response to TikTok, is this
I
emphasis on shorts.
I assume so, and
Yeah.
Instagram has become a bunch of reels now, right? So,
Huh. I haven't
yeah,
ventured onto Instagram yet. Yeah.
it's a change. And I was like, where are the pictures? Like the pictures. I sound so old saying that, but I'm like, they're all they're all like reposted TikTok clips as reels, and I'm like, I
Huh.
wanted pictures.
So
But
that's funny. But it seems like TikTok is sort of exerting more influence now, and pulling
yeah,
things in that direction, which to me is honestly frightening. Maybe I'm
yeah,
just, again, being, but I hope there will still remain a place, and imagine there will be, for things like this, where we actually talk for,
yeah,
an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever,
yeah.
and do in-depth discussions on books and reviews and stuff like that. But I think we
Yeah,
feel that these things are kind of a threat, don't we? Or there's a part of us, maybe.
I think part of it could be feeling of threat. I definitely have to admit that about myself as well. But I think for me, there always needs to be a space, and I'm with you in making sure that there's a space for the long form content, because not only does it allow us to to get in-depth conversations, but it allows you to humanize the people you're talking to.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the, like, just to mention one more time, the word vitriol that I see is on Twitter or like TikTok or places that are short form content. Because when I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm not going to spew things to your face that I would feel comfortable saying, you know, behind a screen, or if I'm not actually going to sit down and talk to you. So the times when I've seen things really, like issues in the BookTube community really be well addressed, is on panels like this, where you have to look someone in the eyes and face the person you're saying something to, you know? So I think,
Wow. Huh. You just blew me away with that insight, actually. The idea that maybe a lot of the incivility we see online is because of the abruptness of the contact between people. It's like, that's not a human being that I'm doing this to.
Yeah.
It's just a, you know, it's a user, it's it's an account. It's just somebody. I don't have to worry about what it does to that person when I say this awful thing, because they're not a human to me. So maybe it's the shortness of the contact between people encourages, or maybe encourage is the wrong word, but allows for more of that type of interaction. I don't know.
Yeah, I strongly believe that, because if you're in a long form content and I say something horrible to you right now, I have to see your facial reaction. I have to sit with you after and deal with that uncomfortable feeling of this horrible thing I just said. You know, it's a different kind of feeling when you sit like this, you know? So I'm with you in loving BookTube and wanting to make sure this space succeeds, even if the other things might feel like a threat. I want to make sure that we honor this space, because it's important. I think it's really important.
Yeah, it is a humanizing, I think, platform in many respects. Particularly in when we have these dialogues. So wow, thank you for that. Really, I hadn't thought of it in those terms. I never quite made that connection before. The idea of the brevity, and by the way, it still is a good, I think, function for things like Twitter. I mean, I make an announcement sometimes when I made a video I'm excited about on Twitter, because I want more people to know about it, you know? So it's good for that sort of thing, for sure. And probably things that I'm not even thinking about. But I think that you're absolutely right about this idea that the brevity of contact between people is something that makes it more likely that we dismiss each other's humanity, that we don't take that into account as deeply as we might when we're having a more prolonged, sustained interaction.
I think the dehumanization, the ability of us to dehumanize other people is exacerbated, right? We do that naturally as humans. You know, we're
very tribal.
That's what I was looking for. Tribal. There we go. We're tribal creatures, right? So why do I feel like I don't fit in Japan? There's many reasons that can go back to that, right? But I do think online allows us to dehumanize others in a way we haven't been able to before. Because before, you'd have to have your tribe behind you and be like, no, I don't like you. And you have to feel confident enough to say that to someone. And now you don't really need that, you know?
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Yeah. And it is also true that, ironically, in this age of information and internet and all of the potential to connect, that we end up in these little tiny corners, you know, little bubbles where we're reinforcing the same message with each other all the time, instead of venturing outside of our comfort zones.
Yeah, it's something all of us are guilty of, myself included, you know. It's almost unavoidable to have some form of echo chamber. You know, like I mentioned earlier, it's always a work in progress, trying to increase the sources that you're getting your information from. But as humans, we can only take in so much, right? So it's just, you know, I could talk about this for ages, because the dichotomy of the internet, what it has the potential to do, what we do with it, how we should handle it. It's so intriguing, because humans, I don't think we're built for this much information. We're not built for it. the internet.
Yes, we didn't quite evolve for this, did we?
Yeah.
For most of our the existence of our species,
Yeah.
we didn't have these tools, and
Right.
yeah,
I don't think we know how to handle them yet.
yeah, yeah, very
Yeah.
interesting. Well, Taylor,
Yeah.
I want to thank you because I feel like you have expanded my consciousness here
Oh,
in the course of this discussion. I really appreciate you sitting down with me, taking this time.
yeah.
This is so wonderful, getting a chance to talk with you and hear about some of the books that you love and some of your insights. Just this is why I'm here. And so I'm just very grateful to you
Oh,
for
thank
this
you.
hour and a half or so.
Mm. It went so quickly. I just
Okay.
looked at the clock and I'm like, oh my God, like when did that happen? But yeah, this was one of those examples, like we mentioned earlier, where the conversation just flows. So I really appreciate you having me on. I had a great time.
Yeah, Phil, thank you so much. And I hope we'll have a chance to interact again.
Oh,
Certainly, if well, I'll tell you what, when I pick up Greenbone Saga,
mm.
I would love to have a conversation with you, maybe.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh,
if
consider
you're
it
open
done.
for that.
Consider it done. And honestly, I could use a reread. So if you give me a little bit of a head start, I could
Okay.
like make sure I'm fresh.
Okay. I feel like I would gain a lot from talking with you about that trilogy. So,
Oh.
yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you.
Cool, cool. So great. This is what happens when we talk with each other. We all these
Right?
exciting things. So, well, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being here. And I will have a link to Taylor's channel, Made Between the Pages. Did I say that right? Right? Yep.
Yes, yes, yes.
And Made spelled very creatively. I forgot to ask you why it was spelled that way.
Yeah, so my middle name is actually May, M-A-E.
Ah,
So made between the pages.
I love it. I love it. Yeah.
Double entendre is not the right word to use there. Double meaning.
Yes, yes, double meaning. Yeah, wonderful. So there will be a link to Made Between the Pages in the description below. Go and check out her channel if you want to see some really awesome insights and some discussion of some of the books that we mentioned here today and
Mhm.
lots of other cool things. So everybody, till next time.
Bye.